Good afternoon, everyone. You're here with Shannon and Paula from Sage Wellness Connection, and we're back with another webinar talking about the 8 dimensions of wellness. And we have a special guest with us today to chat with us a little bit about wellness in the agricultural field and within agricultural families. So we're really excited to be chatting with John.
And I think what's interesting, especially, Paula, you and I had talked a little bit when we talk a little bit about ourselves and our own histories, is both of us have kind of, crossed paths with farming. You probably almost more so in a way, because you had family members, both in your mom's side and your dad's side. Of course, it both looked a little bit different. She grew up in Saskatchewan, your dad in Trinidad, I believe.
Yes.
So the farming, I'm sure, looked dramatically different, but still had that family piece to it where everybody had to work together to make the farm work. For myself, I was actually, I guess, more of a town person, but had the great fortune to move out and live on an actively working farm when I was young. It was some of my greatest memories, for sure. I loved riding on the tractor. I loved helping feed the cows. I kind of loved all of those aspects of family doing all of that together, and even helping out other pieces of the family members, all of those kind of things. So I'm so happy that I got to experience that as a child as well. And, as I moved on in life, I made it a priority to be able to live on an acreage so that my son could experience doing chores and things like that. But just also, I wanted to just say that Paula and I have had this long path of working in kind of the recreational wellness industry. We've trained in that. You would think that we always say that we did all of this together, but it really was just the latter half that we seemed to do together, because we just felt it was really important to have as much knowledge so when we wrap that around our experiences, we have something to offer people as we move forward.
Absolutely. And I think the wellness for both of us has always been such a huge priority in our lives, and learning to balance that work life and just creating one flow between the two that is just our lives. I think that's also been very important. And that's really what led us here. And once we learned about this rural mental health project through the Canadian Mental Health Association, it's really struck a chord that this is something that we could actively be a part of and share our passions and our knowledge as well.
I think also what's important to do that is it is a rural mental health project. Mm-hmm. So just in the nature of the title alone, it only made sense that we moved forward and we made sure that we were talking as well about our agricultural industry and our agricultural families, because they are probably the primary resource in Alberta when we talk about rural and remote areas. So we wanted to make sure that we were highlighting the importance of mental health and well-being exists in all families, not just in rural, like town centers, but also those agricultural families too. The same things that happen in families in rural and urban settings are happening in families that are living on farms as well. But of course, the picture maybe looks just a little bit different. So it's important to highlight the lifestyle, and really we hope that we open the door to a broader conversation to make sure we're supporting our farm families the same way.
Exactly, because I'm thinking that a lot of farm families, it's almost a luxury to be able to step back and have the time to take care of your mental well-being, to do the self-care pieces and all that. So we'll explore that a little bit more as we get chatting with John. So welcome, John. We're very excited to have you with us today. And maybe you can start and tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and where you're at right now with your farming.
Yes, thank you. It's a pleasure to be on. Good afternoon. I was born in 1946 in Hungary. And then that was short-lived because we were invaded by the Russians. And my mom's family was from Germany, Europe. and we were able to flee there. And from there, she had relations in Canada, and we come to Canada in 49, which was funded by her relations. And we ended up coming on a train, not a luxury train as we have today, but it was an open car that we got to Edmonton. And from there, we come to Valley View. That's where her relations were farming. And from there, we worked for a few years. And then in 1954, my dad took up what they call a homestead, which is 2 quarters, approximately 320 acres, and started opening land and moved here. And started up with very little, but we were very happy to be in Canada, which was a free, prosperous nation. And from there, I took over the farm, worked here as a family with my oldest sister and mom and dad, and 2 more sisters were born in Canada. We worked together, and in 1975, I took over the farm. I married a Saskatchewan farm girl in 1967, and we took over my dad's farm, which was a half section, not a big farm, but we took it over in 1975. And from there, we, raised our kids, 2 boys and a daughter, and tried to work in the oil patch just to find extra income to where we could expand. And the need of productive agricultural land was really important. And to develop it was, of course, high cost. And today, we ended up with approximately 3,000 acres and fairly modern equipment, which is all run by GPS control, air seeders, etc. And we do a mixed farming, such as cow-calf, sell the calves in fall, and grow the forage and the hay, and rotate our farm land. And that has been very successful because instead of using high-priced fertilizer and chemical, we try to stay very neutral in regards to that, because the chemical part, I was not a high believer of any of that. So today we are slowing down. The boys are taking over the farm, and my daughter's, of course, married and moved away a little bit, but still in agriculture. So I think the success and the well-being of a family in agriculture, where we produce an awful lot of our own products, such as gardening and our own meats, chickens with eggs, etc. So it's very rewarding, and also for our children to have grown up in this environment is very special to us.
Yes,
sorry. No, go ahead.
I understand that you have a very big garden, and that's a huge part of your life. Yes, we do a lot of our own canning, and pretty much do the cucumbers. We have a season that's fairly fast growing here. Mm-hmm. And we can grow corn. We can do our cucumbers, carrots, and it's all canned, and it's very good. And of course, we do our own processing of meats. Raise our own pigs and mix it and do sausage and cure our own bacon. So we're fairly sufficient in as far as growing our own food, and it's very rewarding when we see the kids following that, and actually was able to work together with my family on a very rewarding basis. And today they are carrying on and doing well.
Well, I think you kind of take it to that whole new level of, it's kind of a trendy word now to say farm to table, yet you've been doing it pretty much your whole life. So I think that's what's so exciting about having the conversation with you, is to also, just when we talk about our wellness philosophy and our wellness wheel, we talk about all these different aspects, from finances to occupation to emotional, social, physical, wellness, and yes, and environmental. And just in your very short blurb there, you've already touched on all of one of those areas.
That's exactly what I was thinking.
Family. Yeah, isn't it like crazy? So, and I think that's the exciting part about having that conversation with yourself and really beginning to understand farm families, is that is the life. That is the true essence of living out on the farm, living from what the land has to offer, living with what you're able to produce on that land, and then bringing it back to feed your families. And I have to put a shout out. You don't just do that. You also support your community in so many ways. You donate so much to your families and people around you. So, I think that that's that other piece that we talk lots about, even in an occupational sense, but also in a connection and rewarding sense, is that you feel very committed to your community and making sure that they have access to the same kinds of things as well.
I guess one of the things that, oh, sorry, John.
No, it's fine. Go ahead.
I guess one of the things that I've been kind of thinking about as you were talking, I love that you have such a positive attitude, and it sounds like you're just coming from such a place of gratitude for everything that you have. But because we really want to unpack this picture of agriculture and the families and what it means to actually have to rely on the land and the weather and so many things that are out of your control. And growing up, I remember my mom talking to my grandparents, and a lot of the conversation was about the weather, or there was hail, or there was some kind of thing that was out of their control. So, John, how do you manage some of the stress of those things that you can't control? How do you keep such a positive attitude?
Yes, it is. It is very challenging. That's one of the reasons why we went to the mixed style of farming. Mm-hmm. And the big reason is you put a crop in, like your cereal grains, and you need to have rain. And that is regardless almost in what you do in agriculture. However, if it rains a little bit too much and the crop gets weakened by too much rain, you have a very, very high yield in hay. The forage grows like crazy, and your pastures are very good. The cattle do excellent. So sometimes that cushions the lack that you might get for your grain results. And also, the other thing is in fall, if you get a frost, and that happens, and you got to be prepared for that. And if you grow cereal grains, more so than your canola, is you can bale that, salvage that, and it is actually very, very good feed. And it'll give you a chance to either sell some of that or some of your hay that you have a surplus. So it kind of works hand in hand, and it backs up one to the other.
So you have to have some business sense as well, it sounds like, to be able to do all this and put these pieces together.
Yes. And the other side of it is that as a family working together, which we did, we were able in Alberta to have such a surplus of work, meaning oil related. And it, it's fantastic that we were able to do approximately 50 plus years of oil field. And both of my boys were in the oil field and still are. And it's been super. So we had to do a lot of planning as a family to be able to make it function at home when we're not a whole team. So it's went pretty well, but it took quite, I'm going to say, a strong pillar for me to be a leader, and it turned out very rewarding.
Excellent.
I think you've always made that point as well of the family unit, that having to work together, everybody having to pick up some pieces in that. Say, if you were gone because you had to work the oil field, cows still need to be fed, things still need to happen. So you really did have to rely on different pieces and people within that family unit to make that happen.
Yes, for sure. And the big thing that went with this is trust amongst us, because a lot of times there was loneliness of the people, not just at home, but maybe for me or one of the boys that were gone at work. Sometimes I was gone for 6 weeks at a time, and it most certainly affects you. But if you can feel confident of things are still happening and the trust is there amongst us, and it was very rewarding.
Interesting. I imagine that would be very, very overwhelming at sometimes. I just want to, because I just feel like we're touching on so many things with the wellness wheel. Before we get into this too far, I want to just maybe go back, take a little step backwards, and talk a bit about the wellness wheel. John, you probably don't realize that you're doing our jobs for us and connecting all the dots, but the wellness wheel is a tool that the Rural Mental Health Project and Shannon and I really believe in. It's a tool for self-exploration that can help us connect the dots, as I said, between all areas of our lives, because we believe that these 8 dimensions of wellness are all interconnected and they're all interdependent and equally important in our lives. So here's the wellness wheel.
We really talk about that harmonious piece of the wheel. And John, you've touched on some of those things of that importance, right down to even identifying the loneliness while you're away, but also the struggle of maybe the people that are still back keeping the farm going, and all of those different pieces that had to work together. So we talk about it either in a wheel, or we talk a little bit about it as a puzzle, that in order for that puzzle to be put all together, you've got to have all of the right pieces and have a commitment in those pieces. And we're not saying by any means that this was some perfect picture that just rolls along just like the wheel. At times, we've got to work a little bit harder. I'm sure you, like you had said, around the finances. That's why you went and worked away, is to support the financial piece, because you had a vision of what that farm could be and should be in order to keep it within the family. So you had to make some tough choices, and then we're looking at the occupation and finances, but you knew it was going to impact the emotional piece too, and social, obviously. You're leaving some family members behind, or your boys were leaving some people behind where they would normally have them as support people. And what I think I hear in that story too is that staying connected, how important that became in order for this wheel of yours to continue down the road.
Yes, I think the stress level, and you mentioned finances. Finances is a huge stress. It's very similar to weather, and you got to be very, very cautious not to run your finances too high, because that wears on you daily. And the things that can happen in agriculture is your equipment can break down, and you need to fix. So you got to make sure that you've got funding available so that you're not trapped and can't get your work done, because that has a lot of after effect to it. So the financial side of things is very, very important, so that you can stay on top of it and not to be overfinanced to where you can't see ends come together. And that is a huge stress level.
John, was it difficult to make the decision to get into the oil field and step away from the farm for periods of time when you were working? or did you just know that's what you had to do?
It was something that we discussed very well. I was encouraged by my family to take on some of the role in the oil field, and it turned out very well. And I had my youngest boy and his family take charge of the farm management, with many phone calls coming my way in between.
I'm
but
sure.
It wasn't for me, and I don't know, it was there. I spent 20 years in drilling, 22 plus years in construction supervision and well site and road preparation for drilling rigs to come in. So with my background of starting in the oil patch very early and then moving forward, it was exciting for me, and I really enjoyed it, but my heart always was in agriculture.
Mm-hmm.
I think we hear that lots, that connection piece doesn't leave, right? It's just a place of finding how you can support it to be able to get back to it. I think of all the people that we've talked to, that seems to be the running theme, is that everybody is just trying to get back to be able to support that lifestyle that they love so much. And there's always sacrifices. And I think this will probably speak to even some other occupations outside of the agricultural industry, of families having to make those decisions about somebody working away in order to support the household. But you're right, there's stresses that come with that. Choices and tough choices have to be made in it in order to see that long-term benefit and gain for the entire family.
Exactly. Yeah. I imagine that your life would have looked a lot different if you would have stayed and decided not to work away. I imagine that would have been a struggle.
Yes. It's if you want to maintain and gain in, assets and increase and stay to where you need to be in modernizing your equipment, it sometimes wasn't feasible to just sit on what you got. The opportunity was here, and as a family, it was a decision we made. And a lot of times there was not just stress on me being gone for that long, but it was also stress on the family members that were back calving cows or combining, whatever it was. It definitely was a team family effort, or this would have not functioned.
And I think that leads us to our next slide that we're on, just the stresses that farmers face, that people in the agriculture field face overall. Shannon, I know you love the stats, so I'll leave this up to you.
Well, and I think it was important just to note, because I wanted people to understand that the same things that can happen to people, like we had said before, in urban areas, in smaller town areas, happen in farm families and agricultural industry as well. That, it's a high risk job. And I know people don't necessarily, they see the pretty pictures of the farm family walking hand in hand down the pasture kind of thing. But the potential of industry, because I've been part of enough farm families to know that when a piece of equipment comes down, they're throwing themselves underneath tractors and various things. Or I've even been coerced into pushing cows in the middle of a storm and not knowing, I could hear something running at me, but not really seeing or being able to know what was running at me and whether I was going to be in the way or to be actually any effect at all to move them in the right way. So the potential of injury there is actually quite high. So that can't be denied. It's not like just because you were on in the oil industry that you hear lots about injury there. The same things can happen, but your farm has to go on. Those, like we said earlier, the cows still need to be fed. If it's time to bring in the crops, and this is your window between the right weather and the wrong weather, you have to move forward. So you have to get the equipment going, and that is high stress. And unfortunately, we're saying right now that 1 out of 5 people have received prescriptions for opioids at this point. And we want to bring up, that is probably the other pandemic, as we like to say, almost out there is around prescription opioids, and it's affecting our farm families as well. But ultimately, we want to make sure that there has been this level, because of the financial stresses that you brought up, John, the unpredictability pieces, that depression is a potential in that. And we're seeing it more and more. And I'm guessing it's been there before, but nobody was talking about it before.
That's what I was thinking for sure. It's not I'm sure it wasn't an industry where people are sitting down talking about their mental well-being, let alone their mental illness.
Mm-hmm. Yes, for sure. And John, you brought up many of these points, and as we did in our previous conversations, hence why we came up with this, is some of those main stresses, not only because of the danger and potential of danger, is that unpredictability of the weather, whether it's frost, it's too much sun, it's not enough sun, it's too much rain, it's snow too early, it's snow too late. Those are things you have no control of. No matter, you can wish it all you want, you can watch the weather channel all you want, it's still not going to change the weather. But you have to be almost have a sense about you to be able to push your way through, look to that weather and make good decisions based on what you know at the time, which can be stressful in itself in any kind of industry. But you also brought up that sitting there with borrowing money, but the need to borrow money to keep the farm going, but keeping it at a reasonable level that if things go awry that year, you're not in too deep. That's a heavy burden to carry as well. And of course, the cost of healthcare, not to mention, I've watched more of my friends and family that have farmed. Sick isn't even necessarily a word because they just keep going anyways. And sometimes some have left their health behind in that. And we hope by having more of these conversations, we can encourage and find ways that people can take care of themselves as well, in both that physical aspect and in across all those 8 domains that we talk about. So in that mental health piece of things too, because there are just so many things that can lead to, like we talk about the frustration, the helplessness or depression, that maybe before somebody gets there, we can offer some good supports to help people along the road.
Well, I'm almost wondering if the opiate crisis within the agriculture field is part of the, because you have to just go on. If you have a farm, if you have cows, things have to get done in the fields. And so pushing forward prescription for something to help you along, maybe that's part of the reason. I'm just throwing that out there. But I agree, Shannon. I think that a lot of this has not been talked about. And I'm sure you would agree, John, that there's many times where you just had to forge ahead and keep going because that's what needed to be done.
Absolutely. Is just for an example, if you're just got a job in town, you work your given hours, may it be 8-hour shift, whereas the farm, even like right now, we're into the midst of calving cows, and I, when it's cold, yes, I have heated barns to bring them in, but you're always getting the one that's unexpected, and you can't leave a wet baby lay outside. So you get up every 3 to 4 hours and doing checks, and you can't say I'm too tired to come into work. You just do it. You got to pour it on. And my favorite saying, there is no can't. You got to do it. And it doesn't matter whether it's haying. If the sun shines, you got to do it. So that has to be, it's built in you, and you can't weaken, and you got to still appreciate at the end of the day, at the end of the year, of what you've accomplished. And that's the lifestyle it is. And there's many days it's not easy, but it's also rewarding.
Yes, I'm sure it is. It sounds like that from your description of when you were talking about building the farm. But I also think that it's really important to note that you had a support system. I know you still had to push forward and still get out there and do it, but just that importance of having that support system, even if it's just someone to, share the responsibilities with, or someone to vent a little bit because you're frustrated over the weather. Did you rely on the family a lot for that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm one to get tired and then complain. And the support that I've got over the years is great. It's just somebody to talk to and share your feelings. And that helps a lot if you can share your feelings of the struggle that you're in that day. And especially when you get overtired. And quite often that is the case in agriculture. You don't say, well, I'm too tired, I'm going to sleep. Well, you can't always do that. There's times where you can have a nap, yes, but you got to push on.
I think that's really interesting, John, that you're saying you need to share your feelings, because I'm sure a lot of people, they don't think that's necessary. They don't think that's important, but it really is. And I'm just so happy that you said that, because sometimes just sharing your feelings and getting it out there and having someone else validate you and say, yeah, I get it. This has been a really hard spring. I'm exhausted as well. Sometimes that just helps, because you're not feeling alone, or you're realizing that this is normal to feel this way, and that's okay. And that's huge, because that's the first step, is just talking about it and opening that dialogue.
I think too, John, because you had mentioned kind of going back to that pillar piece, you have taken on that role for sure. And by having those kind of beliefs about being grateful for what you have, that it's a positive to share your feelings. It's okay to be frustrated. And hey, sometimes we're going to say things that aren't as nice as they could be to each other, but still coming back to bring those people back together becomes so vitally important.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it's true that the stress levels there. But I think it's important to open up and share, even with neighbors. It doesn't always have to be family. I found a real rewarding in sharing is by just taking some garden veggies to the lodge, senior lodge. And that's been awesome. They just love chatting, and you can share some of your hardships if you wish. And they come on and they're just smiling and they're so thankful. It's very pleasant to see that, and it helps you.
Oh, absolutely. That's that social wellness piece, right? It's feeding that part of you that maybe is lacking because you are so busy. So taking that time to do those small things is going to really be uplifting as well.
I think that chance to talk to our seniors who have lived it also puts perspective, because they can be kind of on that side of lived some pretty, difficult times as well. Like I think back to your parents coming over here, look at our news as of lately, there's people that are fleeing similar to how you had to flee. So that really puts perspective, that something that we've never had to live with or experience. But, speaking to our seniors, to yourself, really brings that back to how much we can be grateful for. And once again, when we talk about the wellness wheel, when we offer and kind of share the things that we have, that just brings not just perspective, but also a value to that social connection, to our sense of emotional well-being, and all of those different pieces. And it even could be almost spiritual, like.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I'd like to just share one more thing, and that is, it sounds maybe a little different, but in agriculture, just the agriculture part of it, I've actually quit twice. I just said, you know what, I've had enough. And the reason being is, when you go to work in the oil field, every 2 weeks you get a paycheck. And on the farm, if the open market, such as grain, livestock, and if the prices drop, you feel like you've done all this for nothing. So I quit twice in agriculture, but I want to share that because quitting is not the answer. You have to continue on and bear in mind that we are in agriculture food producers. And if anything, our world needs it more than ever before.
Absolutely. So, John, when you were at that point where you felt like you wanted to quit, what did you do? What got you out of that feeling?
Well, again, it's an opportunity to work in the oil field, and you can make fairly substantial money. But the difference is, and I want to share that because the difference is when you come home and work for yourself with the family, that is no boss telling you what to do, when to come to work, when you need to quit. And it's just such a difference in having something that you accomplish yourself instead of a big company that you work for. There's no sense of reward there other than you get your money. But that's what kept me in agriculture, is the rewarding effect and producing food and helping the world, if you wish.
So a bit of that ripple effect as well, right? It's starting with you and your family and just expanding to your friends and community, and then outwards from there. I think that's really interesting.
Well, and I think we talked a little bit yesterday about how rewarding it is, just to put perspective for other people that are listening that maybe haven't had the opportunity to be a part of a farm family, is when you grow something, whether it's a tomato or a cucumber or some lettuce, and when you take that, it's successful, and you put it on your plate, it always tastes better. It feels like you really did accomplish something, that it wasn't growing somewhere. And I'm not taking away anything from tomatoes that come from Mexico, because I've had those too in between, but there is such a sense of reward when it's something that you have produced and brought back. And we've talked about food security. You're right. It is something, it's that beginning of, we have to have a safe place to stay, and we have to have food security. If we're not going to support our agricultural families, we're not going to have that.
Yeah. And the sharing of the different, produce or whatever it is that you're growing, the sharing amongst neighbors and family, I think that's really great as well. And that it builds a connection amongst each other also.
For sure. And, the opportunity in different sectors in agriculture is huge. It's still there. We raised, like I said, cow-calf units, but I also artificial inseminated some of my top cows, purebred cows, and tried to raise her own herd sires. And that's very rewarding because you can try to match genetics and the different genes of how they produce for you. And we were successful in accomplishing that and marketing semen on some of our herd sires throughout the world.
But it's intellectual wellness right there.
Funny.
Right?
I was just going to say the same thing, that you've had such a curiosity, and I'm sure that's a little bit of your driving forward in looking at farming in a different way. We go back to those initial pictures and we look at that small tractor that your dad had, which I'm sure was a major accomplishment, especially when he was faced with so many acres of, you can't do that by hand, to what you have now, to what you build beyond. And you want to talk about a ripple, we're talking about across the entire world now, just based on that intellectual need to learn more, build something better, do something different. That's extraordinary.
And I think this slide speaks to that as well, right? Expanding on the knowledge that you had. And it was just, sounds like you were really forward thinking and very creative.
Yes. Looking back, when my dad started, it's quite exciting for me to look back at times and see where we're at today. But my dad started clearing land with that little tractor and plow. You had to clear land by hand, no power saw at that time, 1954. And there'd be a little opening in trees, and he'd knock down and clear up all by hand and maybe develop 5 acres in a day. And today, just looking at where we're at today, with huge equipment, all GPS controlled, and you can work, 320 acres or more in one day. The thing that I want to leave with that, as where we're at today, the technology is fantastic, but it's harder to understand it, and we can't self-fix it. And the cost of today's equipment is mind-boggling. So we work with, but maybe the stress level wasn't as high then as it is today if you're overfinanced.
And isn't that something? It is such a give and take, that movement forward. We see it even if you drive a car now. Somebody might be able to do an oil change themselves or whatever. Just the average person really can't. Just, once again, a perspective thing for somebody who's not in the industry. But now we're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of equipment and more. And you aren't able to just get out the wrench and give it a few bangs here and there and make it go again. You want to talk about really working towards that intellectual wellness. You would have to know a lot and trained a lot just to get these equipment running quite the same way. So I'm sure that does make sense. I'm sure your dad probably couldn't even fathom that this is what you would be riding around in one day to do your farming in comparison to what he was doing.
Yes, absolutely. It's mind-boggling. It is a pleasure to run today's equipment, is without a doubt. But you got to be very, very careful that you're not over financed, because most of my days in farming, if we needed to run on a line of credit, we were talking $1,000 payments or $1,000 costs. Today, it's millions. And I think the stress level there is very mind-boggling. And our weather pattern, if anything, is not as good as it used to be.
Do you think some people, or some younger people that are in the agricultural field, feel that they have to have this big fancy equipment to be relevant in the field, to be able to keep up with everyone else around them?
Yes, you're totally right. And the difference was, as my developing in agriculture right from the very start, is borrowing money was very, very hard to come by. Today's world, it's not that easy. You got five working days in banks and lending firms, and you're gone. You're up and running, and you're talking millions. You're not talking thousands anymore. The stress level today, I feel, is by far higher.
Yeah, it sounds stressful just hearing about that, because I think that it's almost like a bit of a competitive edge that the younger people would feel that they would need to survive in this field.
Yeah, I've got to just add that you heard me mention that I was able to work out and compensate. Today, you'd be wasting your time if you thought you could go to work in the oil field to make $1 million payments. That just isn't, it's not going to happen. So your stress level is huge amongst not just the husband of the backbone of the family, if you want to call it that. It's throughout the family because of the costs of everything.
Well, and you said it's really a family affair. Doing this business of farming involves everyone in the family. So of course the stress would cross over to everyone else for sure. John, do you notice with your neighbors or other farm families that you know, do you see that there's a lot of, I guess, really high stress right now?
Yes, very high. And it, it, it sort of boils down to, if the lending firms stop lending, we're in huge crisis. Because, like I said, you can't just spend $1,000 and think you're going to buy your fertilizer and your operation. You just can't. And your stress level of seeing neighbors, yes, as long as the borrowing is there, it'll keep going. And you take my daughter and their family, with the drought we had, just for an example, they barely could make ends meet because they're still in the developing mode as far as borrowing money and building up. And it's huge. It's huge on the entire family.
Do you think people are accessing outside supports when they need it, such as talking to a counselor or even a financial advisor, or, like you said, other neighbors? Do you think that people are doing that when they're feeling stressed, getting that outside help?
Not in agriculture sector. I mean, you'll see that at the personal level, possibly some counseling, etc. Not in agriculture. You're just going forward because you have no choice, because you're in a financial crisis, and to borrow more, you just need to do it. You can't quit. If you quit, there's a chance of losing what you've worked for.
Well, I think that's an important thing to bring up, right? Because when we're talking mental health and well-being, we're not just looking for the strengths, because I think you've brought up many today about really collectively coming together as a family, really talking about it, supporting each other, hearing each other out. Those are great things, but there's always gaps. And I think that is an important gap, is to open that door. As much as asking people to be curious and look for those supports, I think we on the other side also need to open up the door and normalize those supports, because you're right. If I was responsible for millions of dollars, and it was this very slippery fine line between it working and it not working, I feel like I would need some support. And I don't think anyone would question it. So now we need to do that work to make it okay, to say, of course it's stressful, like the message you've been sending, John. Let's look for other people that understand it too, because I think there's nothing worse if you feel a little patronized from somebody because they can't understand what it's like to be in that industry. But setting up our people around that, having voices such as yours, John, in there, making sure that it is okay, and really hoping that we can move forward in that way.
Yeah, I think that's very important. And I'm just looking at our last slide. I think, again, John's touched on so much of this, learning that there's more than one way to do something, instead of just forging ahead down that same path, doing the same thing over and over without trying to discover new ways to do things and explore new avenues to take that might help to bring in a little bit of money to kind of as a cushion when there's things that you can't control. And staying open-minded. That sounds like that was something that was important to you, John, to be open-minded to maybe coming up with new ideas and looking outside of the things that you were doing to be able to kind of grab onto those things as they came along.
Yes, I think in future, what I would like to see for agriculture, which is food producers, which we all need, I'd like to see our governments somehow put a cap on expenses, if you want, to justify the product, and maybe have it so that the landowner in agriculture can survive. We are looking at critical times with our cost and our interest rising. I think that if the government would say, we've got to be able to look after these people to where they can stay in business, or we're all going to go hungry. So, if they could somehow get a balance, if you want to call that, is just as, I'm not saying that the person in agriculture, the families in agriculture, want to necessarily get rich. That isn't the point. The point is they got to survive. So if we can get a fair market value at what we have our costs.
That's interesting. And I think, yeah, people in agriculture, I've never heard anyone say I'm in this business to get rich. Often it is because I think you referenced this before. It's almost like it's in your blood, and that's why you got into it, and that's why you stay in it. But moving on a little bit, just kind of shifting gears. John, what do you do to develop your wellness? In the last slide, it said join groups. And I think that's one thing that's really important, is join some kind of group. Or maybe it's like you talked about with us before we started this webcast, was that you going to church, things like that. What do you do to keep yourself well?
Well, I've always been a spiritual minded young fella going to Sunday school with my parents. And we have at our local community a family that his wife has been an RN and is working in the public health sector now. And her husband, he's really into counseling, and he does do a little bit of gospel preaching. And he's been a great help of sharing, listening, and that's been a big help for me.
Encouragement.
Yeah, it's a huge encouragement for myself and my family.
That's excellent.
Well, and once again, we talk about the importance of building up all those aspects in the 8 domains and having that spiritual practice, whatever it looks like. That's such an excellent example. You said to yourself, maybe not the typical pastor or preacher that we would see maybe right in the church setting, that you found somebody that can do something similar for you. But whatever the practice looks like for you, it's just really important that you have it. And I do want to say, though, I know, we talked a little bit earlier about how much donating and things that you do within your community. I think that's a big piece for your wellness. If I was to hazard a guess here, you really like that, supporting other people and helping people make that connection as well.
Absolutely. And, it's just, I've heard that from Sheldon, our counselor. It's a greater blessing to give than to receive. Like when you're in need, somebody gives you something. That is beautiful.
So what kind of groups do you support, like food bank, or where do your donations go to?
Well, I have various places that I like to donate to. I've always had a heart out for kids that are disabled, kids that are in wheelchair, young kids that are in hospitals. I like to support that, and youth groups. It's things that I didn't have and I can help now is a huge blessing for me.
Oh, that's awesome to hear.
I really like how creative you've been around that. I think we may have said it earlier, but I just wanted to make sure we said it again about how your story about taking all the dill into the store, and then the store gave you a whole bunch of bread, and then you passed on that. It's such a great, simple way to help other people, and everybody gets something from that.
Yes, it's I had a really superb garden this year. Yes. And I took fresh dill in once a week when it was time to people start canning. And I talked to the manager because, they have rules there too. However, I said, you're outdated bread, and I have pigs that this bread has got wheat in it. So it's very useful for me. And I said, the first thing I told them, I don't want no money for my dill. You can have that. I'll bring it in once a week. And you wouldn't believe when I go to the store in weeks to come after this, they called me the dill farmer. So, little things are rewarding.
Oh, it really is. And we have to be on the lookout for those kind of things because they really bring us joy and they serve such a great purpose in our lives.
And I think it gets back to the basics. My brother would be so thrilled. I remember when we were younger, that's all he talked about is why can't we live in a lifestyle where he always said trade chickens for chickens, but I'm not really sure why you both trade your chickens back and forth. But I think his idea was kind of what you're doing, John, you had an excellent garden this year, had bountiful amounts of cucumbers and tomatoes and dill and all of these kind of things. And then you share that with one person, they give you something you need. I know, you really have taken that environmental piece of cutting your own meat, doing all that, but you also share that with so many people, not just your family, but the broader community as well.
Yes, and we do homegrown chickens, of course, which we call free-range fresh farm eggs. And they are on high demand. And it's quite amazing how an egg or a chicken, I guess, for that matter, is so useful. And I've shared, this will be my second spring now, I shared where I give an incubator and the eggs to fillet and shared it with the grade 1 class. And that turned out amazing.
Oh, I imagine they probably loved that.
Yeah, when they hatch, they would go after so many days, they'd candle them and just, it's amazing how kids don't understand that agriculture part of it because they've never grown up with it. So, it sounds like a little thing, but it is good for our well-being.
Oh, absolutely. I know we do this a lot at our office as well with our, a core group of the staff will trade things. If someone grows potatoes and then someone makes salsa, or there's apples and someone has zucchinis, we'll all trade those. And it's such a good feeling, but it's also very sustainable. It's great for like an environmental practice, but it touches so many other domains as well for our wellness. And I think that's kind of that getting back to basics philosophy where one person has something and the other person has something else. And then we're able to switch.
Well, and I can say, I've been the benefit of some of your pickled carrots that I quite love, but I now have people around me that love them. So I might have done a little exchange to get something in return for them because they were so valued, a hot commodity, I will say.
Well, yes. And I think I was a recipient of some potatoes that
that
were from your garden as well, and some tomatoes. So we've benefited down here as well. So
and it just teaches so much, right? To our kids as well, of where the food comes from, that you can actually be a part of, whether that's raising it, growing it, establishing something a little bit bigger, establishing practices that can, like you said, Paula, be a little bit more sustainable. What a great thing to begin at the age of, grade 1. Maybe you just open the door for a kiddo that didn't have that exposure before, but now has a future of something that they could be a part of and maybe building and broadening from there.
Yes, absolutely. And I think a lot of times these little things, such as just hatching out an egg and seeing this little chickie, there's so many sections, different parts that you could be in agriculture. And I think there's room now, probably more than ever, for females, ladies, to be involved more so than ever before in agriculture. So that's just a little beginning by taking this to a grade 1 class.
I love that idea, breaking down those walls and barriers of what people maybe traditionally saw as the farm family or who needs to be the primary person on the farm. I love that idea that we're no longer creating barriers. We're just actually opening doors, that it's anyone could do that. And maybe those grade 1 kids just learned something like that and empowered them to consider that possibility.
Or even if it's just, you're giving your potatoes to someone and that child tells their mom that they'd like to start a garden. It's again that ripple effect, right? Because that's that, having a garden and being able to supply yourself with your own food, your own vegetables. I think that again is very sustainable, and it's so rewarding to be able to eat your own carrots from your own garden and things like that.
And I think you're right, Paula, that it just, I think that's the idea of today, talking about agricultural families and how that kind of sweeps across all of those 8 domains, that if you're going to go down that path, big, small, somewhere in between, it's just still vitally important to still build up each one of those areas. But this is a life that possibly you could do that all. It's all like a one-stop location, right? You can build up those social connections, build up your emotional well-being. Obviously the physical part, if anyone's ever pushed cows in and out or whatever, or weeded a garden or any of those kind of things, it just ticks all of those boxes. But in knowing that as well, we still have to support it so that we could do that in a way that doesn't bring us just stress. It also brings us that joy, that sense of gratitude, all of those things with it.
Mm-hmm. And I think also, if we'd like to encourage people, if they are feeling stressed or they are struggling or they're feeling a heavy financial burden, to get connected, even if it's with your family, friends, talk to your neighbors, or finding professional supports in your community that you can connect with and talk about some of the things that are going on and unload and unpack that stress. I think that's so huge, so important. It's vital to be able to talk about.
And having the opportunity to do a little research around that, not only, talking to John, of course, from my own little brief histories as I've passed either my relations that have been in farming or, my little bit of time. I thought it was very interesting that we're seeing more and more resources starting to come to the surface. The Do More Agricultural Foundation has some excellent things on their website, and this is around that more mental health piece of support. So I think that if you are just looking for something, it's well worth looking into as well. Most farm families know FCC, that's that farm credit piece of things, but they also offer beyond just the financial advice. They're offering other supports on their website too. It was similar. We did a financial workshop with Roxanne Arnell, and I love the way the financial people are beginning to see things as to looking at the whole person before we're not just talking money anymore. And I'm hoping that, through FCC and things like that they're beginning to see that importance too, that we got to speak to the person first and understand what their goals are in order to support them financially. Because as you said, John, finances in farming, this is big business now. This isn't, trivial little hundreds of dollars here or there. This is millions. And then finally, the Healthy Aging Corps is also a funded site, but it had some excellent resources on there too. So, if you're wondering or just want to find out more, or you're just being curious because you're trying to build your intellectual wellness, these are a few places. But not to forget that I've put these resources on our mental health resource hub, that they're available. If you go onto our resource hub under the finances, you'll see those resources, and it gives you a direct link to be able to go and access that at any time. with our hub, it's free access 24/7. You don't have to leave your name or number or anything like that. But if you're wanting us to look into some more resources or have questions or just even looking for support, that's something Paula and I do as well, where we can help you work through that mental health and well-being on the domains and maybe finding out really where the struggle is coming from. But ultimately access this hub, and hopefully that gets you going in a direction that will support you as you move forward.
And that's our website at sagewellnessconnection.com. And yeah, please check it out. So thank you so much for being with us today, John. We've really appreciated learning about your history and just getting some insight into what it's like being in the agriculture field.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
And I do want to say as well, we hope that maybe we can have you back one day on a podcast, because I know there's many more stories in you yet that people, I think, would love to hear, just even in that, having that oil field business side of things too, just being able to manage yourself through that in a good, healthy way. You've had some great things to say, so I would love to bring that to the people one day as well.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.